My husband thought demanding separate bank accounts would force me into submission. He believed cutting me off was the ultimate power move to hide his $15 million secret. But he only severed the lifeline covering his debts when he publicly humiliated me at his barbecue last Sunday to welcome his mistress. He unknowingly triggered the trap my father and I had been perfecting for 3 years. My name is Scarlett Hayes. At 32 years of age, I had perfected the art of being invisible. To the bustling workforce at Thorne Dynamics, I was nothing more than the quiet administrative assistant who filed invoices and kept her head down in a corner cubicle. They saw a woman who wore sensible cardigans and brought a packed lunch every day. They had no idea that the meek wife of their regional CEO had just received an encrypted email confirming her appointment as the new chief financial officer of the parent company. I stared at the glowing screen of my private laptop, reading the offer letter for the 10th time. It was a validation of my skills, my intelligence, and the nights I spent secretly correcting the disastrous financial errors my husband made. The front door slammed downstairs, shaking the frame of the house. I closed the laptop and slid it under the sofa cushions just as heavy. Uneven footsteps echoed on the stairs. Bradley Thorne was home. He barged into the living room, his tie loosened and his face flushed with a mixture of expensive scotch and rage. He had been working on the Northwood project, a development deal that was currently stalled due to his own incompetence, though he would never admit that. "You are just sitting there," Bradley sneered, tossing his briefcase onto the armchair. "I have been out there fighting a war to keep this company afloat, and I come home to find you reading a magazine." I placed the magazine on the table, keeping my expression neutral. "I just finished cleaning up the kitchen. Bradley, would you like some water?" "I don't want water," he shouted, the veins in his neck bulging. "I want a wife who actually understands what pressure is. God, you represent everything wrong with my life right now. You are dead weight, Scarlett. A leech." He paced the room, gesturing wildly. I watched him with a cold detachment that surprised even me. In the past, his words would have made me cry. I used to beg for his validation. But tonight, looking at the man who claimed to be a business genius while I secretly fixed his quarterly reports to keep him from being fired, I felt nothing. The love I once held for him had not just withered, it had turned into dust. You contribute nothing to this household," Bradley slurred, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Do you know how embarrassing it is my colleagues have wives who run charities, who have connections? And I have you, a glorified secretary." "I do my best to support you," I said softly, playing the role he expected. "Your best is pathetic." He spat. He rubbed his face aggressively, then looked at me with a sudden, manic gleam in his eyes. "We need to fix this image. I am inviting the partners and the investors to a barbecue this Sunday. At the lake house." My stomach tightened. The lake house was the property he claimed to have bought with his bonuses. "This Sunday. That is very short notice." "Bradley, I don't care," he yelled. "I need to assert my position. I need to show them I am the alpha in this market. You will organize it, and for God's sake, try not to embarrass me. I want the best catering, the best wine. Make it look like we are worth $50 million. He didn't wait for my answer. He stumbled toward the bedroom, muttering about how ungrateful everyone was. I waited 5 minutes until the sounds of his heavy snoring filled the hallway. I walked into the bedroom. He was sprawled across the bed, fully clothed, reeking of alcohol and arrogance. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. I usually respected his privacy. Or perhaps I had just been too afraid of what I would find. But tonight was different. Tonight, I was the incoming CFO of his parent company. I picked up the device. The screen lit up with a notification from a contact saved only as Tiffany. The message was short, but it burned itself into my retinas. "I bought that black dress you like for Sunday. Can't wait to celebrate your freedom. Miss you. Daddy." I stared at the sleeping face of my husband. He wasn't just planning a barbecue to show off to his partners. He was planning a coronation for his mistress. I placed the phone back down gently, my hand steady. He thought Sunday would be his victory lap. He had no idea that he had just invited the executioner to his own funeral. The sound of plastic clattering against the marble countertop sliced through the morning silence like a gunshot. I looked up from my coffee to see my supplementary credit card spinning to a halt next to the sugar bowl. Bradley stood over me, buttoning his cuffs with a look of supreme disdain. "We are separating our finances." "Scarlett," he announced, his voice devoid of warmth. "Effective immediately." I set my mug down slowly, careful not to let my hand tremble. "I don't understand. Did I buy something wrong? The grocery bill was higher last week because—" "It is not about the groceries," Bradley snapped, cutting me off. "It is about principle. I am the one bringing in the wealth. I am the one carrying the burden of this lifestyle. And I am tired of you spending my hard-earned money as if it grows on trees. I need to protect my assets." The irony was so thick it nearly choked me. I was the one who clipped coupons. I was the one who bought generic brands to keep the household budget stable while he dropped thousands on golf clubs and dinners he claimed were for business. "From now on, we split everything 50-50, he continued, smoothing his tie in the reflection of the microwave. "Mortgage, utilities, food. You will have to support yourself with that meager salary of yours. Maybe it will teach you the value of $1. I widened my eyes, summoning the tears I knew he wanted to see. I stood up and reached for his arm, but he pulled away as if I were contagious. "Bradley, please." "I can't afford half the mortgage on my administrative pay," I stammered, injecting a tremor into my voice. "Please, don't do this to me. We are married." "Then maybe you should have married someone in your own tax bracket," he sneered. He pulled a thick document from his briefcase and slammed it onto the table. "My lawyer drafted this last night. It is a post-nuptial agreement stating that our finances are entirely separate retroactive to the start of this fiscal year. Sign it or get out." I looked at the document. It was a predatory agreement designed to leave me with nothing in the event of a divorce. He was paving the road to throw me out and move Tiffany in. To him, this was a victory. To me, it was the final piece of evidence I needed. I picked up the pen, my hand shaking theatrically. If this is what you want, I just want you to be happy." "Bradley." I signed my name. Bradley snatched the paper away, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "Good girl. Now, clean up this kitchen. I have a real job to get to." An hour later, I sat in a booth at a rundown diner on the edge of town, the smell of grease and old coffee hanging heavy in the air. Across from me sat an elderly man in a faded flannel shirt and a baseball cap pulled low. To the waitress, he was just another retiree enjoying the early bird special. To the corporate world, he was a ghost. To me, he was Dad, William Hayes, the founder of Thorne Dynamics, took a sip of his black coffee and looked at the copy of the agreement I slid across the table. "He actually made you sign this?" my father asked. His voice a low rumble. "He thinks he won." "Dad," I said, dropping the act. My voice was steady and cold. "He called me a leech." William chuckled, but his eyes remained hard as flint. "The fool. He is so arrogant he doesn't realize what he just handed us." "Exactly," I replied, leaning in. "By forcing a separation of accounts, he has legally isolated his finances from mine. When the audit hits, he won't be able to claim that the commingled funds were managed by me or that I was complicit in his spending. He just severed the only link that could have dragged me down with him. And the embezzlement. It is worse than we thought," I whispered. "I checked the preliminary logs last night. He is funneling money through shell companies to pay off gambling debts. He thinks he is hiding it. But by separating the accounts today, he just created a clear, undeniable starting point for the forensic team. He trapped himself in his own greed." My father nodded slowly, a look of grim satisfaction settling on his face. Let him have his barbecue on Sunday. Scarlet, let him strut around like a peacock one last time. Oh, I will, I said, staring at the steam rising from my cup. He wants to protect his assets. I am going to make sure he doesn't even have a penny left to buy a pack of gum. My new security clearance as the incoming chief financial officer was like a skeleton key to a burning building. While Bradley snored upstairs, dreaming of his upcoming triumph, I sat in the guest room with the curtains drawn, dissecting the rotting corpse of his financial life. I bypassed the standard ledgers and dove straight into the shadow accounts he thought were buried deep enough to escape the notice of a simple administrative assistant. The first domino to fall was the lake house. For years, Bradley had preened like a peacock, boasting to everyone that he had bought the estate outright with his savvy stock investments. The digital trail told a much uglier story. The $15 million property was not ours. It wasn't even his. It was a rental, leased under a shell corporation called BTT Logistics, and the $40,000 monthly rent was being siphoned directly from the company's shipping budget. He was stealing from the shareholders to rent a palace for his ego. But that was just the surface. As I peeled back the layers of his personal transactions, I found the real reason he was so desperate to separate our accounts. It wasn't to protect his wealth from me. It was to hide the fact that he was drowning. Bradley owed over $5 million to offshore gambling sites and high-interest private lenders. He was terrified that if our accounts remained linked, a creditor might seize my paycheck, or worse, I would notice the massive hemorrhaging of cash. He wasn't freezing me out to teach me a lesson. He was quarantining the infection. I needed visual confirmation to seal his coffin. I hired a private investigator who specialized in corporate espionage. 2 days later, a secure link appeared in my inbox. I clicked it, my heart pounding a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. The video was high definition and crystal clear. It showed Bradley walking out of a luxury boutique, his arm draped possessively around a blonde woman who looked barely old enough to rent a car. Tiffany, I want that bag. Daddy. Tiffany's voice chirped through my speakers. The limited edition one. Get whatever you want, baby, Bradley replied, pulling out a sleek black card. Put it on the corporate expense account. We will just mark it as client relations later. I saved the video to 3 different cloud servers. Then, I went hunting in our own home. I knew Bradley kept a backup of his illegal dealings. His narcissism wouldn't allow him to destroy the evidence of his own genius. I found it taping to the underside of his bottom desk drawer in the study, a small silver hard drive. I plugged it in and watched a parade of felonies scroll across my screen. Ghost contracts, invoices for services never rendered, forged signatures of board members. It was enough to put him away for 20 years. By Saturday night, the tension in the house was suffocating. Bradley found me in the kitchen arranging flowers for the party. He grabbed a vase from my hand and set it down hard. Listen to me, he hissed, leaning close enough for me to smell the stale whiskey on his breath. Tomorrow is crucial. I want everything perfect. But I don't want you hovering around the VIP guests. Do you understand stick to the kitchen and the service staff? I looked at him, wiping my hands on my apron. I just want to help. Bradley, you help by staying out of the way. He snapped. You don't fit in with these people. Scarlet, honestly, looking at you, it is just sad. After tomorrow, there are going to be some major personnel changes in this house. I think it is time I upgraded my life to match my status. He was telling me he was going to divorce me. He was discarding me like an old rapper. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply smoothed the front of my dress and offered him a terrifyingly serene smile. I understand completely. Bradley, I said softly, I promise you, tomorrow will be a day no one will ever forget. He scoffed and walked away, completely oblivious to the fact that the mouse he was kicking was actually a viper coiled to strike. He thought he was orchestrating his rise to power. But he had just given me the final permission I needed to burn his world to the ground. The sun beat down on the manicured lawn of the lakefront estate, illuminating a scene of grotesque extravagance. Waiters in white tuxedos circulated with trays of caviar and champagne, while a string quartet played soft classical music near the water's edge. It was the perfect picture of American success, a facade built entirely on lies and stolen money, and I, the lawful wife of the host, was not wearing a designer gown to greet our guests. Instead, Bradley had forced me into a stiff black skirt and a white button-down shirt, identical to the uniforms worn by the hired help. You are to supervise the kitchen staff. He had ordered me earlier that morning. Make sure the ice does not run out, and for God's sake, try to blend in. No one wants to see you moping around. So, I stood by the catering tent, holding a silver tray of empty glasses, watching my husband parade his infidelity around like a trophy. Bradley looked undeniably handsome in his $5,000 Italian suit, but his charm was as thin as the fabric. Hanging onto his arm was Tiffany. She wore a crimson dress that was little more than a slip of silk, leaving nothing to the imagination. Everyone. "I would like you to meet Tiffany," Bradley announced to a circle of senior partners, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. "She is my new strategic assistant, a brilliant mind." The men nodded politely, their eyes lingering on her neckline, while their wives stood back, sipping their drinks with tight, judgmental smiles. I felt their gazes slide over me with a mixture of pity and revulsion. They whispered behind their fans, wondering why the wife of the regional CEO was clearing tables like a servant. I kept my head down, gripping the tray until my knuckles turned white. Tiffany spotted me. Her eyes lit up with malicious delight. She excused herself from the group and sauntered over, swaying her hips. She stopped directly in front of me, swirling a glass of deep red vintage wine. "Excuse me," Tiffany said, her voice loud enough to carry over the music. "This wine is room temperature. Bradley specifically asked for it to be chilled. Can't you do anything right?" "It is a Cabernet, Tiffany," I replied calmly. "It is supposed to be served at—" Before I could finish, she tilted her wrist. The dark liquid splashed across the front of my white shirt, soaking into the fabric and looking alarmingly like a chest wound. "Oh my God!" Tiffany shrieked, jumping back and feigning shock. "You clumsy cow! You almost ruined my dress!" The music stopped. The chatter died down. All eyes turned to us. Bradley came running, but not to me. He rushed to Tiffany, checking her flawless dress for imaginary specks of wine. Then he turned on me. His face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. He didn't just yell. He shoved me. His hand slammed into my shoulder, sending me stumbling backward into a table of appetizers. The silver tray clattered loudly onto the stone patio. "What is wrong with you?" Bradley roared, his voice echoing off the lake. "I give you one simple task, and you humiliate me. Look at you. You are a mess." I stood there, wine dripping from my shirt, the humiliation burning my skin like acid. But I didn't look down. I looked right at him. Bradley, fueled by adrenaline and the need to save face before his elite guests, grabbed the microphone from the nearby stage. The feedback squealed, making everyone wince. "I apologize, everyone," Bradley panted into the mic, pointing an accusing finger at me. "I apologize for this scene. I have tried. God knows I have tried to make this work. But I cannot live with this incompetence and this pathological jealousy anymore." The crowd gasped. Phones were raised. The blinking red lights of recording indicators were like hundreds of tiny eyes staring at me. "You are useless. Scarlet," he declared, his voice booming through the speakers. "You are a dead weight dragging me down. I am done. I am filing for divorce immediately. Get out of my sight. Get out of my house." The silence that followed was absolute. He thought he had just delivered the final blow to a broken woman. He didn't realize he had just recorded his own confession of cruelty for the entire world to see. "Security!" Bradley bellowed, his voice cracking with the force of his performative rage. Two burly men in black suits hesitated at the edge of the patio, looking uncertainly between the furious host and the wine-stained woman standing amidst the appetizers. "Did you not hear me?" I said. "Remove this woman from my property immediately. She is trespassing." He didn't wait for them to act. He ran into the hallway near the side entrance and dragged out a battered suitcase, my old college duffel bag that I hadn't used in 10 years. He must have packed it himself, tossing in whatever rags he thought I deserved. With a grunt of exertion, he heaved it over the railing. It landed with a wet thud on the manicured lawn, right as the automatic sprinkler system hissed to life. The water arc soaked the bag instantly, turning the scene into a pathetic cliché of a discarded wife. The crowd held its breath. They expected the Scarlet they knew, the mouse, the doormat, to run after the bag, to fall to her knees in the mud and beg for forgiveness. They expected tears. They expected a scene of hysterical desperation. I gave them none of it. Slowly, deliberately. I reached up and unbuttoned the top button of my stained shirt to breathe easier. I smoothed the wet fabric down my sides. I stood straighter than I had in 5 years, my spine locking into a rod of steel. The burning humiliation in my chest cooled into a glacial resolve. I looked at Bradley, really looked at him, and saw him for what he was: a small, frightened boy playing dress-up in a man's world. "Bradley," I said. My voice was not loud, but in the terrified silence of the garden, it carried like a bell. "Are you sure you want me to leave right now? Are you absolutely certain?" He laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Am I sure? Look at you. You are pathetic. Yes, I am sure." Go, I held his gaze. "Because once I step out of that gate, there is no coming back. You are making a choice that you cannot undo." "I made my choice when I met Tiffany." He sneered, wrapping his arm around her waist and pulling her flush against him. Tiffany smirked, resting her head on his shoulder in a display of victory. "Get out of my life, Scarlet. Go find a shelter or something." I nodded once. It was done. I walked down the stone steps, past the whispering wives and the gawking investors. I walked through the spray of the sprinklers, letting the cold water hit my face, washing away the sticky residue of the wine. I bent down and picked up the sodden duffel bag. It was heavy, but I didn't drag it. I lifted it and walked. Every step was a rhythmic strike against the pavement. Click, click, click. I felt hundreds of eyes burning holes into my back, but I did not turn around. I did not falter. I walked past the security booth, past the gilded iron gates that Bradley was so proud of, and out onto the main road. A sleek black sedan was idling by the curb, its engine purring softly. As I approached, the tinted rear window rolled down smoothly. Inside sat a man with silver hair and eyes that mirrored my own, hard, intelligent, and currently burning with a protective fury. My father, William Hayes. He didn't look like the retiree from the diner anymore. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Bradley's car, and he radiated the quiet, terrifying power of a man who owned the very ground Bradley was standing on. He looked at my wine-soaked shirt, then at the wet bag in my hand. His jaw tightened. "Get in." "Scarlet," my father said, his voice low and dangerous. "It is time to go to work." The moment the heavy door of the sedan clicked shut, the trembling, pathetic Scarlet died. The silence inside the car was absolute, a vacuum that sucked away the noise of the party and the shame of the last 3 years. I didn't slump into the leather seat. I sat forward, my movements precise and mechanical. I reached into my bag and pulled out the encrypted laptop and the silver hard drive that contained the autopsy of Bradley's career. "It is done," I said, my voice steady. "The data is mirrored on the company servers. He cannot delete a single byte." My father, William Hayes, nodded slowly. He didn't offer me a tissue or a hug. He offered me something far better. He reached into a leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound in red tape. "This is the asset seizure order," my father said, placing the heavy file in my hands. "And this is the court summons for corporate fraud. You know, Scarlett, I have stayed in the shadows for a long time. People think I am just the retired founder who feeds pigeons in the park. They forget that I retained the title of chairman of the Supreme Board. I hold the voting rights to dissolve the entire executive branch if I see fit. Today, I see fit." I looked at the documents. They were a weapon of mass destruction. "Driver, take us around the block and wait for my signal," I instructed. I reached for the garment bag hanging by the window. I stripped off the wine-stained white shirt and the cheap black skirt, tossing them onto the floor of the car like garbage. Underneath, I was already wearing my silk camisole. I pulled out the suit we had selected weeks ago, a tailored navy blue power suit with sharp lapels and a cut that screamed authority. I slipped into the jacket, buttoning it with deliberate slowness. I fixed my hair, wiping away the water from the sprinklers, and applied a coat of dark red lipstick. I picked up my phone and dialed the emergency number for the legal department. "This is Scarlett Hayes. Incoming CFO," I said into the receiver. "Authorization code Alpha 90. Initiate the lockdown. Freeze all accounts associated with Bradley Thorne and the subsidiary B. T. Logistics immediately. Revoke his security clearance. Cut him off. Understood." "Ms. Hayes, executing now," the voice on the other end replied. I opened the laptop and accessed the smart home controls of the lake house. On the screen, I watched the live feed of the patio. Bradley was standing by the bar, laughing loudly, holding up a bottle of vintage champagne. He signaled the bartender to open another 3 bottles. He pulled out his platinum credit card and tapped it against the machine. I watched the bartender frown. He tapped the card again. Then he looked at Bradley and shook his head. "I am sorry, sir." I could almost hear the bartender mumbling through the screen, though the audio was muted. "It says, declined. Try it again." Bradley's lips moved clearly. "That is impossible. I have a limit of $100,000. I tapped a command on my keyboard system override. Emergency protocol. Instantly, the ambient lighting in the garden shifted from a warm, welcoming gold to a harsh, flashing crimson. The soothing classical music cut out with a violent screech of feedback, replaced by a deafening silence. The automated gates at the front of the property slammed shut with a metallic clang that vibrated through the ground. On the screen, the guests stopped drinking. Confusion rippled through the crowd like a wave. Phones started lighting up everywhere, not to record the party, but to read the breaking news notifications that were flooding their feeds. I zoomed in on Tiffany. She was looking at her phone, her face draining of color. She grabbed Bradley's arm, her fingernails digging into his suit jacket. "Bradley," she mouthed, her eyes wide with terror. "Bradley, look at Twitter. They are saying you laundered $12 million. Bradley looked at her, then at the flashing red lights of the house he pretended to own, then at his declined credit card. The arrogance began to crack, replaced by the dawn of absolute horror. "Turn the car around," I told the driver, snapping the laptop shut. "I want to see his face when the police arrive." The red emergency lights pulsed against the white marble of the terrace, bathing the terrified guests in a rhythmic, bloody glow. Bradley stood center stage, his face glistening with a cold sweat that had nothing to do with the summer heat. He had his phone pressed so hard against his ear that his knuckles were white. "What do you mean, suspected fraud?" Bradley screamed, his voice cracking. "Do you know who I am? I am Bradley Thorne. I am the regional CEO. Unfreeze the account. Now." The voice on the other end was audible enough for the people in the front row to hear. "I am sorry, sir. The flag came from federal compliance. We have instructions to freeze all assets associated with your Social Security number immediately due to high-level embezzlement indicators. I cannot override a federal lock." Bradley dropped the phone. It clattered onto the stage, sliding toward the edge. Before he could retrieve it, a deep, thumping rhythm vibrated in the air. The champagne glasses on the tables began to tremble. The wind picked up, whipping the tablecloths and the guests' hair. A black helicopter banked sharply over the lake, descending rapidly toward the expansive lawn. It wasn't a news chopper. The sleek fuselage bore the gold crest of the Thorne Dynamics Board of Directors. Simultaneously, my car led a convoy of 3 other vehicles back toward the main gate. Behind us were 2 unmarked police cruisers and a van carrying the company's internal audit team. The private security guard at the gate, a man named Miller who worked for a third-party contractor, stepped out of his booth, his hand resting on his holster. He looked confused, seeing the flashing lights of the police cars behind my sedan. I rolled down the window. Miller looked at me, then did a double take. He barely recognized the woman in the sharp navy suit as the soaking wet housewife who had walked out 10 minutes ago. "Open the gate, Miller," I commanded, holding up my new badge. It was a platinum-level access card, the kind only the top 5 executives in the world possessed. Authorizing Officer Scarlett Hayes, property owner. Open it now, or you will be named as an accessory to the crimes taking place inside. Miller looked at the card, then at the police cars, and his face went pale. He didn't ask questions. He scrambled back into the booth and hit the emergency release. The heavy iron gates groaned and swung inward. We roared up the driveway, the sirens briefly wailing to clear the path. The convoy screeched to a halt right at the edge of the patio, boxing in the guests. The blue and red strobe lights of the police cruisers cut through the chaotic red alarm lights of the house, creating a disorienting, strobe light effect. Bradley stood frozen on the stage, his mouth hanging open. He watched as the doors of the lead car opened. I stepped out. The transformation was absolute. The wet, cowering wife was gone. I stood tall in my tailored suit, my heels clicking sharply on the pavement as I walked toward him. My father stepped out from the other side, flanked by the chief legal counsel. A gasp rippled through the crowd. They recognized the power in my stride. Tiffany, realizing the gravity of the situation before Bradley did, tried to slip away toward the side garden exit. She kicked off her high heels to run faster. "Secure the perimeter," I said calmly into the air, knowing the security team could hear me. 2 uniformed officers stepped out from the shadows of the hedges, blocking Tiffany's path. She shrieked as they grabbed her arms, forcing her to stop. "Let me go. I didn't do anything," she cried out, her voice shrill and panicked. "I am just an assistant. I ignored her." My eyes were locked on Bradley. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming train. He was shaking, his hands raising in a pathetic, defensive gesture as I ascended the stairs to the stage. I didn't stop until I was standing toe-to-toe with him. He smelled of fear and stale cologne. "Scarlett." "Wait, I can explain," he stammered, his eyes darting around, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. "Baby, please, this is a misunderstanding." I reached out and plucked the microphone from his trembling hand. The feedback whined for a second, then settled. I turned to face the crowd of stunned millionaires and executives. "Testing," I said, my voice booming clear and authoritative over the lawn. 1, 2. The feedback from the speakers screeched briefly before my voice cut through the murmurs of the confused crowd. "I apologize for the sudden interruption," I announced, my voice echoing across the lawn with a calm, terrifying precision. But as the newly appointed chief financial officer of the parent corporation, and as the sole legal beneficiary of the trust that holds the deed to this property, I am declaring this party over." A collective gasp went up from the guests. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of the wind whipping the tablecloths. Bradley's face contorted. He lunged toward me, but a wall of security guards instantly materialized between us. "You are crazy!" Bradley shouted, his eyes bulging with desperation. "She is lying. Do not listen to her. She is just a filing clerk. A nobody who sorts my mail. Mr. Henderson, the chief legal counsel, stepped up to the microphone stand next to me. He adjusted his glasses and opened the thick red folder, holding up a series of bank statements for the front row to see. "Actually, Mr. Thorne," Henderson said, his tone dry and lethal. "These documents confirm that over the last 3 fiscal years, you have embezzled $12 million from company operating funds. Furthermore, the lease on this estate was paid for using stolen capital, which legally defaults the ownership of the lease to the company's Asset Recovery Trust. That trust is currently managed by Miss Hayes." "That is impossible," Bradley whispered, shaking his head frantically. I separated our accounts. You can't touch my personal money. I protected it." I laughed then. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. "You really didn't understand, did you?" I asked, looking down at him with genuine pity. "When you demanded we separate our finances yesterday, you didn't protect yourself. You handed me the smoking gun. By legally isolating your funds, you removed any ability to claim that I was mismanaging the money or that our assets were commingled. You created a pristine, isolated trail of money laundering that leads directly to you and no one else. You framed yourself. Bradley." I gestured to the technical team in the surveillance van. "Play the drive." The massive LED screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a slideshow of Bradley's vanity photos, suddenly flickered. A grainy but high-definition video feed appeared. It was the footage from the hidden camera in Bradley's study. On the screen, a relaxed Bradley was leaning back in his chair, holding a glass of scotch, with Tiffany perched on the edge of his desk. "These investors are sheep," the digital Bradley said, laughing cruelly. "Especially old man Miller. He wouldn't know a Ponzi scheme if it bit him in the ass." I took his $2 million and put it straight into the offshore account. "And his wife looks like a bulldog in lipstick," the recorded Tiffany added, giggling as she counted a stack of cash. "I can't believe we are using their retirement fund to pay for my new convertible. They are so stupid." The reaction from the lawn was instantaneous and violent. Mr. Miller, a silver-haired investor standing near the front, turned a shade of purple that looked dangerous. "My money!" Miller roared, knocking over his chair as he surged forward. "You stole my retirement fund. You said that investment was triple secured. No, wait." Bradley screamed, waving his hands in front of his face. That is a deep fake. It is AI generated. She is trying to frame me. It is time-stamped, verified, and backed up on 3 federal servers." I cut in, my voice icy. "And there is more." On the screen, the video shifted to another clip of them mocking the board of directors. The crowd began to boo and shout, demanding answers, demanding their money. Tiffany, realizing the ship was going down fast, violently shoved Bradley away from her. She backed away, her hands raised in a surrender pose. "He made me do it," she screamed, her voice shrill with panic. "I didn't know anything about the money he told me he was rich. I am a victim here, I am just an employee." I pulled a single sheet of paper from my inside pocket and held it up. "Nice try." "Tiffany," I said, "but I have your signature right here on the fraudulent invoices for the shell company. B.T. Logistics. You didn't just spend the money. You knowingly signed off on the fake shipping contracts to cover the trail. You are not a victim. You are a co-conspirator facing 10 to 15 years in federal prison for grand larceny." Tiffany's jaw dropped. She looked from me to the police officers moving toward her, her face crumbling as the reality of her situation destroyed her arrogance. I looked back at the crowd, then down at the man who had called me useless just hours ago. The show is over, Bradley, I said, and I don't think they are going to applaud. The lead detective, a stern man with a badge that caught the chaotic strobe lights, stepped onto the stage with practiced efficiency. He did not shout. He did not need to. He simply held up a piece of paper that signaled the absolute end of Bradley's life as a free man. Bradley Thorne, the detective announced, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a knife. I have a warrant for your immediate arrest on charges of corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and 20 counts of securities fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The color drained from Bradley's face so fast he looked like a wax figure melting under the stage lights. His knees buckled, and the arrogance that had defined him for years evaporated instantly. He did not try to run. He knew there was nowhere to go. Instead, he did something pathetic. He scrambled across the stage on his hands and knees, ignoring the officers closing in, and grabbed the hem of my trousers. "Scarlett, baby, please," he sobbed, tears streaming down his face and ruining his expensive tan. "I did it for us. You have to believe me. Everything I built was for our future. Please, talk to your father. Tell him to stop this. I love you." I looked down at the man who had spent 3 years making me feel small. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no anger, just a vast, empty calm. I gently pulled my leg away from his desperate grasp, dusting off the spot where his hands had touched the fabric as if he were a speck of dirt. "Us," I asked, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Bradley, you killed us the moment you threw a credit card at my face and demanded separate accounts. You killed us when you packed my bag and threw it into the mud like garbage." He looked up, his eyes wide and bloodshot, gasping for air as if he were drowning. I was just stressed. I didn't mean it." "Please." "You meant every word," I corrected him coldly. "You wanted to be independent. You wanted to make sure your assets were distinct from mine. Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you asked for." I leaned down, bringing my face close to his so he wouldn't miss a single syllable of his sentence. "You wanted separate lives. Bradley, fine. Now you will have a separate jail cell. And guess what? I won't be in it." I straightened up and nodded to the officers. "Get him out of here." The click of the handcuffs was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Bradley screamed as they hauled him up, thrashing uselessly against the grip of 2 officers. Behind him, Tiffany was already in cuffs, weeping loudly and blaming everyone but herself as she was shoved toward the exit. Hundreds of phones were raised high, capturing every second of their disgrace. The flashbulbs popped like fireworks, illuminating their tear-streaked faces as they were frog-marched toward the waiting police cruisers. The very people Bradley had tried to impress were now live-streaming his downfall to the world. As the sirens wailed and the convoy began to move out, the guests started to scatter. The wives who had looked at me with pity earlier now couldn't even meet my gaze. They scurried toward their cars, clutching their designer purses, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. They left their half-eaten food and their champagne glasses, fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. Within 20 minutes, the lawn was empty. The strobe lights had been turned off, returning the garden to the soft glow of the moon. The only sound left was the gentle lap of the lake water against the dock. I stood alone in the center of the chaotic, abandoned party. The ground was littered with debris, but the air tasted sweeter than the finest wine. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool night air. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't Mrs. Bradley Thorne, the meek housewife. I was Scarlett Hayes, and I was finally free. A heavy, warm hand settled on my shoulder, breaking the trance of the silence. I turned to see my father standing there, his silver hair catching the moonlight. The stern mask of the chairman had softened, replaced by the tender look of a father who had watched his daughter walk through fire and come out unburned. "You did well, Scarlett," my father said, his voice thick with emotion. "You handled that with more grace than he ever deserved." He gestured toward the sprawling mansion behind us, its windows dark now that the party lights were extinguished. The massive structure loomed over us, a testament to greed and hollow ambition. "The trust owns the lease now," he continued. "Technically, this is your house. Do you want to keep it? We could renovate, make it a real home." I looked at the towering pillars in the infinity pool where I had spent so many lonely nights waiting for a husband who never came home. I looked at the balcony where Bradley had screamed at me for buying the wrong brand of coffee. This place wasn't a home, it was a mausoleum of my self-esteem. "No," I said firmly. "There are too many ghosts here. Sell it. Dad, auction it off to the highest bidder." And the money he asked, "Put every cent into a new foundation," I replied without hesitation. "I want to start a legal aid fund for women trapped in financially abusive marriages. I want to make sure no one else has to wait 3 years to find their exit strategy." My father smiled, a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. But before he could answer, a commotion near the police cruisers drew our attention. Bradley was fighting. Even with his hands cuffed behind his back, he was thrashing against the officers, refusing to get into the back seat. He saw me standing there and lunged forward one last time, his face twisted in a desperate, ugly rage. "You think you have won," Bradley screamed, spitting saliva onto the driveway. "I will sue you. We have a marital contract. You can't just take everything. I will drag you to court for breach of contract." The officers tightened their grip, but I held up a hand. I walked over to him slowly. The gravel crunched under my heels. I stopped inches from his face. He smelled of sweat and fear, the expensive cologne long gone. I leaned in close, my voice a whisper that only he could hear. "Read the fine print." "Bradley," I said softly, "a marital contract is null and void when one party engages in felony criminal activity that defrauds the marital estate. You tore up that contract the moment you signed those fake invoices." He froze, his mouth opening and closing uselessly. "And Bradley," I added, pulling back to look him in the eye one last time. "Congratulations. You always wanted to be famous. You always wanted to be on the front page of the business section. Check the news tomorrow morning. You finally made it." I nodded to the officers. They shoved him into the car and slammed the door. Through the window, I saw him scream something silent and impotent, but I was already turning away. The sirens wailed as the car pulled out, the red taillights fading into the darkness, taking the last 5 years of my pain with them. I walked back to my father and the team of loyal employees who were waiting by the sedan. The night air was cold, but I felt warm. I felt powerful. I offered them a smile. Not the polite, submissive smile of a wife trying to please, but the radiant, dangerous smile of a woman who had conquered her demons. "Let's go home," I said. "I have a board meeting in the morning." The next morning, the sun rose over the glass skyscrapers of the city, reflecting off the steel and concrete. I walked through the revolving doors of Thorne Dynamics headquarters. I wasn't wearing an apron or a cardigan. I wore a cream-colored suit that fit like armor. I didn't stop at the reception desk. I walked straight to the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. The doors slid open to the executive suite. The plaque on the door that used to read Bradley Thorne, Regional CEO, had already been removed. In its place, a new, polished brass plate was being screwed in by a maintenance worker. It read Scarlett Hayes, Vice President of Finance. I walked into the office, the smell of fresh coffee and opportunity filling the air. I sat down in the high-backed leather chair, spun it around to face the city skyline, and opened my laptop. A new era had begun. And this time, the bank account was all mine. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I really hope you enjoyed seeing Scarlett take back her power. Please leave a comment down below and let me know where you are listening from. I would love to chat with you all and hear your thoughts on Bradley's karma. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and please smash that hype button to help this story reach more people who might need a little inspiration. See you in the next story.